Okay, so welcome to the next video in the series on building resilience and increasing your capacity to take on adversity or confront challenge. Okay, so during this video I'm going to talk about context. So I'm going to talk about how context is going to let you overcome adversity and take on challenge. And that's based around how you look at past challenges and then put that in context to the current challenge or future challenge. So I kind of regularly expose myself to challenges, adversity, sort of discomfort. So throughout both my career and in my sort of personal pursuits and recreational pursuits, I've always looked at what are the challenges I can do, and always had a different relationship with how I see discomfort than what most people kind of have. So in my military career, I sort of looked at past military conflicts and was sort of focused on what people were able to do during that. And then when it came time for me to overcome adversity or take on large challenges, that I used that as the context as what I was able to do based on what had been done previously or people were able to overcome. And when you look back at some of the stuff that's happened in the past, people have overcome huge challenge, huge adversity, well beyond anything that I would expect to see in my lifetime. So that gave me context that if they were capable to do it, then I should have the potential to develop those tools or adapt to my scenario or situation and be able to overcome that. So that kind of helped me throughout my career, which sort of started off in sort of smaller engagements and then sort of grew into overnight, multi-day sort of conflicts where I was able to draw upon the previous experience, use the context from what had been done in the past to overcome what I was going through at that time. And then that's transferred into a lot of things I've done outside of that. So in my recreational pursuits, I've recently did a 350 mile, sort of 550 kilometre foot race through the frozen Alaskan wilderness, which took me around 8 days. So during that race, I was sort of covering distances of 60 to 80 kilometres over sort of 19 to 20 hours, 29 hours during the day. And when I went in, my perception was that I could go till midnight and then I'd get fairly tired and I'd have to look at resting for a couple of hours. So I'd sort of rest for 2 to 4 hours there and then I'd push on during the next day. So I was doing that for sort of 3 or 4 days. And that was working quite well. And then I came to a point where we got to the Alaskan range, we started heading into the mountains, and we had to pass over we had to go over a pass to get onto the other side and into the Alaskan interior. As we were heading up there, we were told that the temperatures were around -30 over this pass. And I got to a checkpoint just prior to the pass, and then I set out from there about lunchtime with the expectation that I'd get over the pass around midnight, and then I'd be able to bivvy up just after midnight on the other side of the pass, outside of the wind and in a less exposed position. Rest for a few hours and then I could push down into the checkpoint beyond that. So it was around kind of 20 kilometres to the pass, and then from the other side of the pass it was around 25 kilometres down to the next checkpoint. So I set out, conditions were a lot worse than what I'd anticipated. There was a lot of snowdrift which caused a nav error which cost me probably 5 or 6 hours, a lot more time than I'd hoped. And I had to backtrack a fair way. So what ended up happening is when midnight came, I was still a long way from the pass. I still had about 12 kilometres to go to get to this pass. It was heavily exposed, there was a lot of high wind, and bivvying down at midnight was going to potentially become a survival situation if the weather had deteriorated, whether the temperature dropped or whether the wind picked up. It potentially could have left me in a very compromised position for survival in that case. So I really had no choice but to push on to the pass. As much as I didn't want to, everything in my body was screaming to go to sleep. My mind was heavily exhausted. I felt exhausted. I was micro-sleeping, I was zombie walking, really hard to focus on what I was doing. It felt like for periods of a minute or so I'd be sleeping while I was walking. And I was just at a point where I thought I'd almost reached my limit for what I could do that night. So I kind of pushed on, changed my focus a little bit to get there. Around about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, I eventually climbed over the pass after what felt like a long time and a lot of climbing, and then started pushing down the other side. By this stage, or not long after, the sun had started to come up, and with that I thought, well, there's no point in bivvying now. I've missed my window to sleep, and so it's just going to be easy to continue down to the checkpoint, which would take me around about 5 hours, and then I could rest there. So I decided to push on. Went down the other side of the Alaskan range into the interior, got to the checkpoint just after lunchtime, and from there I sort of sorted out my gear, dried my stuff, did everything I needed to do to be prepped to move on, went to sleep for a couple of hours, was reset and then moved on. But what that did do though is that changed my context of what I was capable of, or how much work I could do during the night, how much distance I could cover. So from that point on, as midnight approached, my context now was I had the capacity to travel all night into the next day, or well into lunch, or I could go for sort of 30 plus hours without rest. It was going to cost me a little bit, and I'd have to make sure that I kept fueling and I had the strategies around maintaining that effort. But mentally and resilience wise, I had the ability, based on what I'd just done, to continue on all night. So it completely changed the way I approached the race after that, and I was able to improve my performance to the point where the last few nights I was able to push a lot harder than what I had done earlier in the race, despite the fact I'd covered so much ground and I'd depleted so much sleep over those periods of time. So when you're looking at context, that's kind of what it's about, is that what you've done previously gives the context to what you can do now, or what you're capable of doing in the future. So the magnitude of what you've exposed yourself to in the past is going to give context to what you think you're capable of in the future. And again, that's a perception. So that perception will change as the magnitude of each challenge or adversity you overcome increases. That's going to increase the context of what you believe you're capable of in the next time. And that's kind of going to give you that relative level of concern. So if what you're about to take on you perceive as being a much greater magnitude than what you've done previously, then you're going to have a higher relative concern about your ability to do it. But again, it's just a perception. So if you've been able to expose yourself to a lot of adversity or challenge in the past, then something that has lower context or lower magnitude now, you're going to have nearly no relative concern. It's going to seem almost trivial. So would have been lots of cases in the past where you've done things that have been difficult, but now it's almost a trivial event for you. So to sort of raise your ability to take on adversity, you need to expose yourself to as much adversity as you can, or to a point where you can progress from what you're exposed to now to higher levels, and prepare yourself for times when you are going to experience high levels of adversity, or there's going to be really big challenges that you didn't anticipate to meet. You're going to be prepared for it if you expose yourself to those things now. So if you increase the context of what you think you're capable of, okay, and even using what people have done in the past, so it may not have seen it, but you may have read about it, that's going to increase your modelled response. So you're going to learn a little bit from them, like when I spoke about looking at past conflicts, okay, and that's going to change your expectation around what you think you're capable of, and then you're going to go into these scenarios much better primed to come out the other side with the outcomes that you're after. So by increasing all these factors, okay, your threat response is going to be reduced, and then you're going to be able to process information better. You're going to see opportunities over threat, and you're going to come out with a much better outcome, okay, feeling a lot better and a lot less stress than what you went in with. So I hope that helps. I appreciate you listening in. Thanks for your time. Hope you're enjoying the series, and there's a lot more to come over the next coming weeks. Thanks.